Ilara woke before the first light brushed against the rusted roofs of the small border town, her breath visible in the cold air, her fingers stiff but ready. The shed behind her home stood like a loyal secret keeper, its walls marked by years of wind and dust. She pushed the door open, the creak louder than she wanted inside. Lay her world's scattered tools, bent nails and sheets of iron that she had gathered from the old factory yard. Every piece told a story of effort and rejection. Yet, she had refused to throw any away. She believed that in the right hands even broken things could find a purpose. Her father had been a soldier long before her birth. His stories lingered in her mind, tales of loyalty, courage, and loss. He had never returned. From the northern border, leaving behind a single medal and a promise, her mother whispered that he had fought bravely and that bravery ran in Ilara's blood. But when Ilara tried to speak of weapons and defense, the town turned its back on her. They said such matters belonged to men and soldiers, not a girl who should be sewing or cooking. She had smiled politely, but in her heart, she carried the stubborn flame of creation. She had found the barrel, first a piece of iron pipe discarded behind. The barracks dented at one end and blackened by rust. She spent nights hammering it straight over the small furnace, her arms trembling from the effort until it looked almost new. Her next task was to carve a stock from the wood of an apple tree that had died last winter. She shaped it with care sanding until the surface felt like silk beneath her palms. She whispered to it, calling it her companion, though it could not hear for her. It became a living thing, one that would stand between life and loss. The neighbors noticed her absence from the evening gatherings. Old Mara, the baker's wife, told others that Ilara had gone mad, spending every night in that dark shed. Her friends who once shared laughter now watched from afar, whispering. As she carried metal scraps through the streets, she could feel their eyes but did not turn to meet them. She had learned that vision mattered less than belief. She could see beyond their judgment to the day when her work would prove its worth. Every sound inside the shed had its rhythm, the hammer against metal, the hiss of heat, the soft scratch of sandpaper against wood. Ilara worked with a quiet devotion. She rarely slept for long. Her dreams filled with echoes of gunfire and smoke, she imagined. Herself standing alone on a hill watching as danger approached, knowing that the weapon in her hands could protect her town. She had no wish to harm, but she refused to be helpless. Once she brought her creation to the edge of the fields where the soldiers practiced. She wanted to test its aim. The men laughed when they saw her holding the rough weapon. One of them shouted that she should leave the fighting to those who understood it. Another said she would hurt herself. She said nothing. She set up a wooden post, took her stance, and fired. The sound cracked through the air. The bullet struck the post, dead center. Silence followed for a moment before the laughter returned louder than before. They said it was luck that no woman could shoot. Like that, she nodded quietly and went home. That night, she sat by the fire, staring at the weapon on her table, its surface glimmering faintly in the glow. She felt no pride, only a deep pull in her chest, a sense that her work was unfinished. She began to disassemble it piece by piece, studying each screw, each groove she adjusted. The trigger replaced the spring, strengthened the barrel. She worked until her hands bled, and when she finished, she held it up and whispered, "You are ready now." Outside, the wind carried the smell of smoke from the north. Rumors had begun to spread of raids near the river, of soldiers missing, of strange fires seen at dusk. Ilara listened quietly whenever the men in the tavern spoke of these things she memorized. Their words, the direction of the danger, the weakness of the town. She knew that when the moment came, the official guards would not be enough. They were brave, but few, and slow to act. She had seen the hesitation in their eyes when the alarm bell rang during drills. Hesitation was death. She would not hesitate. Her mother begged her to stop, to rest her weary hands and forget this madness. Ilara kissed her forehead and promised it would all make sense. One day her mother's eyes were full of Fear not for the world outside, but for what it was turning her daughter into a creature of shadows and sparks and sleepless nights. Yet Ilara felt no darkness in her heart, only the light of purpose. She loved her mother. She loved her home, and that love demanded defense. Days turned into weeks, and her rifle grew into something more precise than she had ever imagined. She began testing it in secret in the dry valley behind the ridge where no one came. She measured her shots by the marks on stones, by the echo that bounced from the cliffs. She learned the wind and how it curved the path of her bullet. She learned the silence that followed the shot and how it made her tremble, not from fear but from understanding power. When she returned to the village, she walked with quiet steps, carrying a cloth bag that hid her creation, but no amount of cloth could hide the weight of her conviction. One evening, she met an old man who had once fought beside her father. He sat outside the barracks. With a pipe and a distant look in his eyes when he saw the metal glint beneath her bag, he asked what she carried. She hesitated, but then placed the rifle on his lap. His hands, rough and scarred, traced its shape. He nodded slowly without judgment or surprise. He said, "This is not madness, child. This is memory. You are finishing what he started." His words struck her deeper than any insult she had heard. They filled her with both pride and sorrow. That night rain fell hard against the roof of her. She lit a single candle and wrote in her father's old notebook, recording every step of her work, the type of metal, the length of the barrel, the curve of the trigger. She wanted no secret to die with her. If she failed, someone else could continue. Her effort, she imagined future hands stronger, steadier than hers, building from her notes, creating not weapons of destruction but tools of protection. She smiled faintly at the thought and kept writing until dawn. Her world outside the shed began. To shrink, people spoke less to her children, no longer ran past her gate. The soldiers who once teased her now watched her with unease, as if she were a reminder of something they feared in themselves, the willingness to fight. Not because they were told to, but because they must. She did not resent them. She knew that courage often looked like defiance to those who had forgotten its shape. The rifle was nearly complete when she realized she lacked a proper sight. She spent 3 days searching through the scrapyard and finally found a cracked lens from an old binocular. She ground it carefully until it fit the frame she had forged from copper wire. When she looked through it, the world narrowed into clarity. The hills, distant and gray, seemed close enough to touch. She could see the tower on the far side of town, where the sentries stood half asleep. She could see the fields where the crops struggled against the cold. She could see the sky heavy with clouds like bruises waiting to break. She began to imagine what would happen if the danger reached them, how quickly the calm could turn to chaos. She saw herself standing alone at the tower, her rifle steady her heartbeat. Calm, she did not dream of victory. She dreamed of survival. The thought both frightened and strengthened her. She knew the difference between fantasy and purpose. Hers was no fantasy. It was a promise. When she returned home that evening, the colonel himself had come to the village. His men were inspecting supplies and questioning the locals about stolen parts of equipment someone had told them about her rifle. She stood by the gate as the soldiers searched her shed. Her heart pounded, but she remained silent. The colonel found the weapon, lifted it in his hands, and looked at her with unreadable eyes. He asked if she had built it herself. She nodded. He said nothing more, only placed it back on the table and left with his men. One soldier stayed behind long enough to whisper, "They will never believe until they need you." Then he followed the rest into the fog. That night, Ilara sat in the darkness listening to the rain. She thought of the colonel's gaze, of the unspoken warning in the soldier's voice. She knew she had walked too far to turn back now. Her work had become her voice, her defiance, her hope. Outside, the wind howled across the empty streets, carrying with it the scent of storm and war. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer for strength. The days that followed were restless. The town prepared quietly as more news came from the north. People spoke in hurried tones, doors closed earlier, lights dimmed sooner, and the laughter that once filled the square faded like the last note of a song. Ilara continued her routine each morning. She trained her aim at the ridge each night she returned to reinforce the small cracks in her rifle. She treated it as one might a living thing, feeding it care and patience. The more she worked, the more it became an extension of her will. One evening, she walked to the riverbank where the reflection of the moon rippled across the surface. She placed the rifle beside her and looked at her own reflection. She barely recognized the girl staring back. The softness of her youth replaced by the firmness of resolve. She thought of her father again and wondered if he had once sat under the same moon, thinking of the same fears and hopes. She imagined his voice saying that courage was not the absence of fear, but the act of standing through it. She whispered to the water that she would not run. The villagers continued to mock her, though their laughter grew quieter as the tension in the air thickened. They said she was wasting her life, that no homemade weapon could stand. Against the rifles of real soldiers, she let them talk because she knew that words were wind and metal was truth. Every sunrise brought her closer to something inevitable, though she did not yet know what form it would take. She only felt its pull. Like a current beneath still waters, by the time the first snow began to fall, she had become a figure of mystery. Children peeked at her shed door but ran away before she could speak. Even the guards at the gate treated her with reluctant respect. She had transformed from a source of ridicule into a quiet legend, the girl who forged her own destiny in a world that told her not to. She did not seek their recognition. She only waited for the day when her purpose would reveal itself in fire and smoke. And though she could not know it yet, that day was nearer than any of them imagined. The night arrived heavy and dark, the clouds hiding the moon, as if the sky itself were afraid of what was coming. Ilara sensed it even before the first cries reached the edge of town. The wind carried a strange smell of smoke and iron. Her fingers tightened around the rifle she had built. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow alive with movement. She moved toward the ridge where she could see the northern road. The hills beyond were cloaked in black. She knew the raiders were coming. The first screams echoed from the southern edge of the village. Men and women ran through the narrow streets carrying children and animals, shouting warnings that were swallowed by the wind. The guards scrambled to the gates, their horses snorting in panic. Ilara climbed the old watchtower with her rifle strapped to her back, her boots silent on the wooden steps, her heart steady, despite the fear that would have paralyzed anyone else she could see them. The raiders moving like shadows across the fields, their torches flickering like angry stars. She took a deep breath and raised the rifle to her shoulder, her eye lining up with the makeshift sight she remembered. Every night spent perfecting this moment, every bruise, every blister, every whispered prayer to make her aim true. She exhaled slowly and pulled the trigger. The bullet cracked through the night, a sharp report that made the birds scatter and the raiders freeze for a heartbeat. The first one fell, clutching his side, screaming a sound that made the others hesitate. Chaos erupted as the raiders realized they were being fired upon from above. Their torches danced across the walls of the town. Lighting faces twisted with fear and anger, the soldiers below scrambled to position their own weapons, but they were few and slow. The raiders were cunning and fast-moving through alleys and scaling walls with practiced ease. Ilara fired again and again, each shot precise, each impact, buying precious moments for the townspeople to escape to the hidden cellars and barns. She felt the rifle recoil against her shoulder and the vibration travel through her arms and chest, but she did not flinch. Smoke began to rise from the far end of the main square. Someone had set fire to the market stalls, flames licking the night sky. The heat was intense, even from her height. The smell of burning wood and straw stung her nose. She adjusted her aim and targeted. The raiders who were trying to push through the barricade, a group of them fell back, confused, their leader shouting orders that sounded like curses across the wind. She could not see him clearly, but she knew the voice of authority when she heard it, and she knew that taking him down would change the tide. Below, a soldier shouted for her to retreat. They could hold the line if she came down, but she shook her head. She could see 6 of them trapped near the granary, their faces pale in the firelight. Terrified and exposed, she could not abandon them. She steadied her hands, closed her eyes for a moment, counting. The wind counting the distance. Then she fired once, twice, 3 times. The bullets struck true. One raider dropped another, went sprawling. Across the cobblestones, the rest hesitated, giving the soldiers below time to push through a side gate and escape the fire. The granary shook as the flames crept closer. She could see the terrified expressions of the 6 men who would have been trapped without her, their eyes wide with disbelief and relief as they realized someone was protecting them from above. They called out thanks, but she did not hear their words. She only saw their movements guiding them toward safety. She reloaded her rifle, quickly checking the barrel, the trigger. The sight, every motion practiced and precise. The smoke burned her eyes and the night seemed to close around her like a living thing. Suddenly a raider appeared at the base of the tower, a shadow moving quickly. Across the wooden steps he began to climb. Elara could hear his breathing faint against the roar of the fire. She aimed and fired again. The shot struck him in the shoulder and he staggered but did not fall immediately. She fired again and he went down, crashing against the wood, sending splinters into the air. She did not wait to see if he moved. She kept scanning the perimeter, watching for any other threats. Her hands never stopped working, her heart beating in sync with the rifle, the night, alive with danger and urgency. The fire grew fiercer. Consuming the edge of the village, the soldiers who had escaped moved cautiously through the smoke, carrying the injured, some limping, some barely conscious. They glanced up at her tower with gratitude, fear, and disbelief. She was just a girl they had mocked months ago, and yet here she was, a sentinel holding the night at bay with her homemade weapon. The colonel had warned them never underestimate the resolve of one who builds their own strength. From scratch, she was living proof of that warning. Another group of raiders approached the main gate, throwing torches and shouting, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of fear. The guards fought bravely, but numbers overwhelmed them. She could see the edge of the crowd being pushed back toward the barns, and she took aim again, firing round after round, each bullet finding its mark. The raiders began to scatter, confusion spreading among them like wildfire. She could feel the tension in her own body, the tight coil of adrenaline. Every nerve alert, every sense focused on survival. Time seemed to stretch as if the night itself refused to end. Every moment was a decision. Every breath, a calculation. She spotted the leader again on a small rise directing his men. He was taller than the rest and moved with authority. She aimed for the space between his shoulders and fired. The bullet struck with precision. He fell forward onto the dirt. The men around him paused, unsure what to do without their command. She did not hesitate. She fired again and again, driving them back inch by inch. The townspeople below seized the opportunity to flee the barns, to the cellars, to the hidden paths. She could see children clutching their mother's hands, eyes wide in fear, yet trusting in her unseen protection. The fire raged closer to the ridge, now licking the lower branches of the trees, sending sparks into the night sky. She felt the heat even at her height. Her coat singed slightly at the sleeve, but she did not retreat. She could see the 6 soldiers making it to safety one by one, guiding each other past obstacles, dodging fallen beams and embers. The last one turned and gave her a look of thanks that spoke more than words ever could. She nodded silently and reloaded her rifle yet again, scanning the horizon for further threats. Hours seemed to pass in a blur. The raiders, disorganized and confused, could not coordinate an effective attack. They tried to regroup near the northern edge, but she had already anticipated their movements. She aimed and fired, each shot calculated to slow them down, to scatter them to buy every second for the lives below. Every shot echoing like a bell of warning through the night. Her arms ached her, eyes stung from smoke and fatigue, but she did not allow herself to pause. Every moment counted. The soldiers who had escaped now regrouped at the far side of the town, sending signals to the other gates. Her efforts had bought them the time to organize. A defense. They moved with purpose, now not panic. A few brave villagers armed with whatever they could find joined them. The raiders realized too late that the town was not helpless. The tide of the night was changing slowly, yet steadily, because of the girl in the tower and her rifle. Smoke thickened, making visibility almost zero. She adjusted her aim by sound, by movement. By instinct, she could hear the shouts of the raiders, the clash of wood and metal below the tower, the terrified cries of those trapped, the soft whimpers of children hiding, yet trusting the soldiers above. And she fired until the cold in her fingers burned like fire. She could feel the rifle's recoil deep into her shoulder, yet she remained steady because she had spent months perfecting not just the weapon but herself. Finally, the raiders began to retreat, some fleeing back toward the hills, others dragging their wounded. They realized the town had been prepared more than they had expected. They had underestimated the skill and determination of a single person who refused to be helpless. Ilara watched them disappear into the darkness, the night quieting slowly as smoke still rose from the burning buildings, the echoes of gunfire fading into distant groans. And cries. She climbed down from the tower, her legs trembling, but her mind clear. She had done what she set out to do. 6 lives saved and a town given hope. When the first soldiers reached her, they could barely speak from exhaustion and disbelief. They helped her down the final steps of the tower, and for a moment she simply stood in the shadow of the fire watching the survivors regroup. The colonel arrived shortly after, his face serious, as he took in the scene. The burning town, the scattered raiders, and the girl who had changed the course of the night. He looked at her rifle in her hands and did not speak immediately. He simply nodded slowly, a gesture of respect that felt heavier than words could ever carry. The dawn arrived, tinged with smoke and ash. The survivors emerged cautiously from hiding, children crying in relief, parents clutching them tightly. The soldiers now took command of the town, restoring order and securing what was left of the buildings. The fire was dying down. Yet the memory of the night would linger in everyone's minds. Ilara sat quietly against a wall holding her rifle, watching the rising sun illuminate the destruction and the courage she had witnessed. She did not boast. She did not speak. She simply allowed herself to breathe for the first time in hours. She knew this night would mark the beginning of something larger, that her life would no longer be just her own, that the rifle she had built with her hands would be remembered not for its flaws, but for the lives it saved. She thought of the 6 men who survived the fire, their faces etched into her memory as a reminder of why she had built the weapon. Why she had trained, why she had endured the mockery and doubt. She had not sought glory, only protection, yet she had achieved both in a way no one had expected. And though the night was over, she felt its shadow lingering across the town, a silent promise that danger would come again, and when it did, she would be ready. The sun rose slowly over the border town, casting long shadows across the streets, still scarred by fire and battle smoke, curled into the sky in thin gray streams, and the air smelled of ash and wet wood. Ilara sat on the steps of the barracks, her rifle resting across her lap, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion, but not fear. Her eyes scanned the town, watching the survivors emerge from cellars and barns. Some limping, some carrying the injured, some simply staring at the ruins in disbelief. She could feel the weight of what had happened settle on her shoulders, heavier than the rifle itself. Soldiers moved cautiously through the streets, assessing the damage. checking for hidden threats and securing what was left of the gates. The 6 men she had saved emerged from a small alley, their faces pale but alive. They stopped when they saw her and the rifle, their expressions a mix of awe and gratitude. They approached slowly, as if afraid that speaking might shatter the fragile peace of the morning. One of them knelt and touched the wooden stock of the rifle, his fingers lingering over the scratches and dents. He whispered words she could not hear, but understood in their meaning. The colonel arrived soon after he rode through the main gate on a black horse, his coat streaked with soot and dust. He dismounted silently, his face grave as he surveyed the town. He paused at the edge of the main square, where the buildings were most damaged. He spoke to no one for a long moment, simply looking at the destruction, and then at the people who had survived. He noticed the 6 soldiers huddled together, and then his gaze fell on Alara, sitting calmly against the wall, her rifle across her knees. She did not move when he approached, only tilted her head slightly in acknowledgement. He crouched before her, examining the rifle closely, turning it over in his hands, as if trying to understand the skill required to create it from scrap metal and broken tools. The weight of it in his hands was different than any weapon he had ever handled. It was crude in appearance, yet flawless in function. He looked up at her, his eyes searching for the story behind the girl who had saved the town in a single night of chaos. He said nothing. At first only traced the stock with his fingers, then nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had suspected. All along, word of her actions spread quickly among the soldiers, and townspeople whispers followed her down the streets. People pointing and talking quietly about the girl who had climbed the tower and held back an entire raiding party. Her name was repeated in awe and disbelief, even by those who had once mocked her. Now she was a figure of quiet legend, a reminder that courage and skill often come from the most unexpected places. The colonel called her to his side in the middle of the square. The crowd parted silently, letting her pass to him. She carried her rifle like a badge of survival, not of pride. He placed a hand on her shoulder, heavy with authority, yet tempered with respect. He looked into her eyes and asked her to explain how she had built it, how she had learned to shoot, how she had kept her resolve through months of ridicule. She spoke quietly, recounting the nights in the shed, the hours of practice, the failures and small victories, the careful adjustments, the calculations for wind and distance. Her words were precise, measured, but the weight of her experience hung between them like a tangible thing. The colonel listened without interruption, absorbing every detail. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment, then lifted the rifle and inspected it again. He spoke, finally, and his voice carried across the square, stating that she had not only defended the town, but had demonstrated ingenuity and courage beyond her years. He said that in the history of the regiment, few had ever accomplished such a feat, and that her name would be recorded alongside those who had turned the tide in desperate moments. He motioned to the 6 soldiers she had saved and said that they would bear witness to her deed and carry her story wherever they went. The soldiers who had once doubted her approached slowly and knelt before her one by one, offering gestures of respect, hands extended as if to touch the rifle lightly, as though contact could somehow honor their gratitude. She allowed it silently, each gesture a silent acknowledgement of her skill and bravery. The townspeople gathered behind them, murmuring words of respect, some wiping tears from their eyes. They had once mocked her homemade weapon and the girl who wielded it. Now they understood the truth that strength does not come from size or reputation, but from determination and purpose. Alara remained quiet through all of this, observing the faces of those around her, the colonel standing tall beside her, the soldiers nodding silently, and the townspeople staring with awe. She realized that her life had changed irreversibly, that she had moved from being a figure of mockery to one of legend. Yet she felt no pride, only a deep sense of responsibility. She understood that the rifle she had built and The skills she had honed were tools not for recognition but for protection that every day forward would require vigilance and courage. The colonel finally stepped back, signaling to the soldiers to secure the remaining town. He spoke to them briefly, giving orders and instructions while casting occasional glances at Alara, acknowledging her presence without needing words. She had already proven herself. He motioned for her to follow him to the command post where maps and plans were spread across. Tables, the room smelled of ink paper and sweat. The colonel gestured for her to sit and asked her for her assessment of the town's vulnerabilities, where she would position lookouts, how she would fortify the barricades, and which routes might be used by enemies if they returned. She spoke clearly, detailing everything she had observed from the tower and her own patrols, noting weak points and suggesting reinforcements. He listened carefully, noting each point she made, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. Her insight impressed him further. The same man who had once trained soldiers now recognized that this young woman had instincts and tactical understanding that rivaled many officers. Her experience in the night of fire had given her knowledge that could save countless lives in the future. He nodded approvingly at her suggestions and said that she would be included in planning sessions from now on, that her voice and decisions would carry weight. Not because of her gender, but because of her skill. Days passed, and the town slowly began to rebuild fires, extinguished streets, cleared debris, removed. Yet the memory of the raid lingered. The soldiers now looked to Alara for advice and guidance. She trained alongside them, refining her skills, showing them techniques she had learned over months alone in the shed. Her presence became a symbol of resilience, the rifle no longer a mockery but a testament to ingenuity. The colonel arranged for official recognition, a small ceremony in the square inviting the townspeople to witness her achievement. He presented her with a badge of merit and declared that her courage had saved lives and inspired all who survived the night. Alara accepted the badge, quietly holding it against her chest. She looked at the townspeople, the soldiers and the colonel who had once been distant, yet now stood in quiet respect. She thought of the nights in the shed, the work and the ridicule, the determination that had carried her through, and she understood fully that recognition was not what she sought, but the knowledge that her actions had protected the vulnerable, that her dedication had altered the course of events, and that she had honored the memory of her father. The colonel remained by her side after the ceremony, speaking privately about future possibilities of her training others in defense tactics of improvisation and observation. He emphasized that her role would be pivotal in preparing the town and surrounding villages for any future attacks. He spoke of building a network of sentries, scouts, and defenders, using her insight, her methods, and her courage as the foundation. She listened, absorbing each word, her mind already planning for the next steps, ensuring that the lives saved would not be wasted. Even as days turned into weeks, her reputation grew beyond the borders of the town. Word of the girl who built her own rifle and defended the town spread to neighboring settlements. Soldiers shared the story. In campfires, travelers spoke of it in markets. Her name whispered with awe and disbelief among those who once doubted her. Yet she carried this recognition with humility, understanding that her greatest reward